few years ago in Ardmore, Oklahoma, in the United States, where I live, there was a young gentleman who was well known in the community to not have a very high IQ. He was tall, he was good looking, he was likable, but he just didn't have the brain power. And I had to tell my four sons, don't just look on the outward appearance. There's much more to an individual than their skin. And I don't know how it is in South Africa, but I know in America that often in the public school system, people get advanced one grade to another, even though they haven't really passed the previous grade. And the thought is that if we leave this boy behind, he's going to lose self-esteem and he might end up a worse individual. So even though he's not doing well, let's just pass him from one grade to the next. And that's what happened to Les. He had been passed from one grade to the next, failing his math, failing his English, and just attending class some of the time, but not really being successful. After he graduated from high school, he did get married, and he came by our restaurant. We have a vegetarian restaurant in Ardmore, Oklahoma. I don't run the restaurant, but I actually own the building and rent the restaurant out to a church member in the area. And he became interested in a plant-based diet. And he began to adopt this. And soon he became interested in the Word of God as the result of the person that was running the restaurant began to study with him the books of Daniel and Revelation. And he became more interested in academic things as a result of that study than he'd ever been in his entire life. He ended up giving his heart to the Lord and ended up being a converted Seventh-day Adventist Christian. Shortly after that, the owner of the restaurant suggested that he go to a place called Mission College to learn to be a Bible worker and to get grounded. This is in the state of Oregon. And so he attended this accredited school to become a Bible worker. Now again, he hadn't done well in his public school system. Halfway through the school, I was talking to the director of the school because he was wanting me to come out and do a weekend series there at his school. And I said, you have someone in this school that I know from our town in Ardmore, Oklahoma. How's he doing? He said, Les, he's a likable guy, but he says he's not making it. I don't think he's going to pass. He says we're trying to help him, but he just doesn't quite have the ability. And he says we have an accredited program. They have to be able to reach a high academic standard to be able to pass. And I said, well, keep working with him. He does seem to have motivation. He says, yeah, he is motivated. At the end, when I came out for it turns out the weekend that I was there was the graduation weekend. And of course, I asked about him at that time. And the director said, not only is he passing, but he's not the bottom of his class. He actually has moved his grades up, and Les is going to be a Bible worker. So a few weeks later, he moved to Denver, Colorado, and he began his first job as a Bible worker. And he was a successful Bible worker. About 2 years after that, he was back at his home. I should mention this. When he became a Seventh-day Adventist, his wife divorced him. And so he was a single man. And he came back to Ardmore, Oklahoma. His parents still live there. And I was happening to eat at that restaurant that lunchtime, and he came up to me and he says, Dr. Nedley, he says, I've really loved being a Bible worker, but I think I could be much more successful if I would be a physician. And I smiled. I said, Les, being a doctor is not for everybody. It is for some people, but it requires an academic rigor that is very, very challenging. And he says, well, I didn't do well in Bible worker school, but then I got my grades up. And he says, I am highly motivated. I said, well, Les, the only way I know that you'd be able to make it through is and even then I don't know, but if you did everything that I recommend on improving your IQ, you might have a chance. He smiled real big and he says, Dr. Nedley, I want to do everything possible to improve my IQ. Tell me how to do it. And so I didn't have time at that time. I had appointments, and so we scheduled a time together where I could go over with him what I covered with you last night and what I'm going to be covering today. And Les took it all in. And the next year, I told him to work on this for a whole year before he tried to work on his pre-med to get into medical school. And he worked this program for an entire year, and then he enrolled at the University of Oklahoma in the hard sciences, general chemistry and biology, and then organic chemistry, getting ready to go to apply to medical school. And I remember the first semester he got a C+ in general chemistry, not near good enough. That semester he got a B- in biology. It was a little bit better in biology. But the next semester after that, he had a B+ in chemistry and an A- in biology. And now he began to take physics and organic, and his mind started to wrap around the subject. And 2 years ago, he took his MCAT examination, and now he is in medical school today. He went from an IQ of 80, which is the bottom 10 percentile of the nation, to an IQ of 120, which is up in the top 10 or 15 percentile of the nation. But his IQ actually was able to improve because he did have EQ, emotional intelligence, with that high motivational component. Now tonight, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, but I wanted to talk about a few more things related to IQ here today. First, a little summary of what we talked about last night up on the screen. This is from the pen of Ellen White. The sin of intemperate eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food, destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. What part of the brain is she talking about here? It's the frontal lobe. And then her next statement is this, and this is a fruitful source of church trials. So the argument in the church board meeting may not be due to what you think it's due to. It may be due to what the people ate before they got to the board meeting. And thus, you will not be able to come to an agreement since you don't have the empathy, you don't have the principled thinking, you don't have those type of things necessary to be able to see and reason from cause to effect and see the long-term perspective of the decisions that you are making. That she then said this, if you understand how much their habits of diet have to do with their health, their characters, their usefulness in this world, and their eternal destiny. Now I would like to talk about something that is not what you put into your body. We gave the text last night, whatever you eat and whatever you drink and whatever you, what else? Do all to the glory of God. So I'm going to talk about things that affect IQ that is not what you ingest into your body like eating or drinking, but is really more on the doing side of things, or in some cases, the not doing side of things. This is an area that is gaining in popularity throughout the world. In fact, I've noticed, since I deal in the realm of depression and anxiety, when people don't respond to medications and counseling, often they're referred to a type of meditation that is an Eastern type of meditation where there's self-hypnosis or there's actually a hypnotherapist involved in the process of trying to make them better. Now, this quote comes from a hypnosis textbook that tries to promote it, but notice what hypnosis does. Hypnosis attempts to cancel out frontal lobe functions. Cancel out what? Frontal lobe functions, and bring people into a trance in which they are highly suggestible. Now, there's many ways in which you can hypnotize somebody, but the textbook also tells you the easiest way to hypnotize somebody. This is most easily accomplished by training the eyes to focus in on one object, the best object being a what? Little flickering light. What will happen then? The person will record information and duties without interpretation or without frontal lobe activity. Now, as the frontal lobe goes down, your analytical area of the brain goes down. You're receiving information but not putting it in the appropriate subsets. And thus, it does have a profound effect on human behavior. It actually decreases the frontal lobe in multiple areas. And we talked last night about all of the problems that come about from compromised frontal lobes. Now, what many people may not realize is they could have a hypnotic instrument in their own home. What trains the eyes to focus in on one object and flickers? What produces that flicker? It's actually the rapid scene of reference change that occurs in entertainment television. You can actually immediately tell, if you turn on your television set, you can look at it for 30 seconds and tell if it's entertainment TV or educational TV. Entertainment TV changes its scene of reference every 3 to 5 seconds on average. In fact, if you were sitting in a dark room and someone was just looking at your face, not at the television, they would see your face constantly changing its hue as a result of the light change that occurs from the rapid scene of reference change. Studies show that when you sit down with an electroencephalogram, EEG, in front of your favorite entertainment television program, within 90 seconds to at most 3 minutes, you will no longer have any beta wave activity. Your frontal lobe will be dormant. You will be in a hypnotic trance. There have been 3,000 books written on the effects of entertainment television in the mind. Over 300 books, or 3,000 studies, 300 books written on it. And there are 17 areas of the frontal lobe of the brain that are adversely affected. Entertainment television increases daydreaming. That's not a good thing. Studies show the more daydreaming you do, this is where you go into a fantasy world when you're at a supermarket line or in a traffic jam, instead of having the mind actually go into something that's useful and practical. Daydreaming increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease significantly, or age-related cognitive decline. It also decreases creative ingenuity. When creativity goes up, daydreaming goes down. And when daydreaming goes up, creativity goes down. We talked about creativity and its associationship with IQ last night. It decreases interest in reading, decreases interest in learning, also a frontal lobe function. It reduces your discernment, your ability to be able to actually sift fact from fiction. Goes down considerably as a result of entertainment television. It trains in non-reaction when you should be reacting. It increases aggressiveness when you should not be reacting. It reduces sensitivity to violence. And on top of it, it's addictive. Just like any frontal lobe suppressant, it is addictive. And studies show that if you're watching entertainment television frequently or entertainment movies frequently, and then you stop viewing it, you will actually have insomnia, headaches, typical withdrawal symptoms that you'll see sometimes as a result of coming off drugs. We used to run 5-day plans to stop smoking in our church. I think we now need to run 5-day plans for stop watching television. Because the world is getting caught up with the fact that entertainment television is a problem, but they don't necessarily know how to get off of it or what to do about it. The more TV adolescents watch, the more likely they are to develop attention and learning problems and to do poorly in school in the long run. The amount of TV kids watched when they were 14 was positively linked with having attention problems later, not doing homework, being bored at school, not finishing high school, and hating school, the researchers found. 14-year-olds who added one more daily hour of TV doubled their risk of academic failure at age 16. The Journal of Pediatrics and the pediatric associations are now well aware of the problems of entertainment television. We used to, in doctors' offices, have big signs, no smoking. Now in pediatrician offices throughout America, they're having big signs, no TV, because of the adverse effects on the mental health and the academic performance of our adolescents. And at the very least, it takes away precious time for family, achievement, and spiritual pursuits. And a lot of people don't realize the vast difference this simple thing of giving up entertainment television can do. A few years ago, it's been a little more than a few years ago, there was a man who grew up in the same city that I grew up in. It turns out we grew up about 15 miles apart from each other, although we didn't know each other, in the big city of Detroit, Michigan. This boy was failing school. He was having all sorts of emotional issues. He was having to be sent to the principal's office frequently, violent tendencies, and F's were showing up on his report card. His mother was poor. His father had left his mother quite a while back and left her dirt poor, raising two boys in downtown Detroit by herself. But she refused to go to the welfare rolls to get enrolled in welfare. Instead, she worked 3 jobs. One of the jobs that she worked at was for wealthy people cleaning their house. And she noticed something when she went into the well-to-do homes. The television was off, and the adolescents in the home were reading interesting books. And that association made her, led her to make a decision to go home and tell her boys, no more entertainment television. In fact, if you want any privileges around here, you are going to have to write 2 book reports for me once a week. Take out interesting books, not fiction books, but interesting educational books from the Detroit Public Library and write 2 book reports a week. And then you will get some privileges. Now, what do you think they thought about their mother at that point? They were pretty negative about her now. What is happening? I'm having trouble at school. Now my mom has wigged out. And what in the world? This isn't happening to my other friends. They're not told they can't watch TV. But yet, she was firm about it. What they didn't realize is she could not read herself. But she said she was going to review those book reports. So she would circle in red and she would make some marks on it so that they thought that she was actually reading those book reports. And in 1 year's time, that's all it took. In 1 year's time, Ben Carson went from the bottom of the class to the top of his class. And he said that he no longer hated poverty at that point. Prior to that, he had a visceral hatred for poverty. But he said, I no longer hated it because I knew it was temporary. And not only did he become a physician, but he became a physician that was so creative that he did things that no other physician was able to do. The simple remedy of giving up entertainment television produced a dramatic difference. Now, it wasn't just that. There was another principle that we're going to talk about that Ben Carson also took hold of to get him to the point where not only was he creative, he was the head of the neurosurgery department at Johns Hopkins. He separated those Siamese twins, and he orchestrated that separation with something that I'll show you here near the end. Speaking of entertainment, back in Ellen White's day, there wasn't entertainment television, but there was the entertaining theater. And she said, there's no influence in our land more powerful to poison the imagination, to destroy religious impressions, and to blunt the relish for the tranquil pleasures and sober realities of life than theatrical amusements. The love for these scenes increases with every indulgence as the desire for intoxicating drink strengthens with its use. The only safe course is to shun the theater, the circus, and every other questionable place of amusement. And that's quite an interesting statement. No influence more powerful. We talked about the effects of diet and drink and what you put into your body. But this is even more important than what you put into your body as far as the adverse effect is concerned. And unfortunately, this is something that a lot of our young people are falling down on. They'll go to our universities and other places and they'll download all of these entertainment movies for free, and they'll be staying up nights watching this stuff, entertaining themselves, and meanwhile, their creativity, their academics, their ability to think outside the box, the rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting goes down to the bottom, and they start to have all sorts of problems that could have been easily preventable. Now, last night, I talked to you about IQ and its relationship to longevity. The higher your IQ, the less likely you are going to die. Particularly in the next 10-year period of time where they have done studies in regards to that. And we mentioned one of the reasons is if you have high IQ, you're more likely to learn, retain, and apply knowledge. Even the knowledge that we're giving you today, you're more likely to apply it if you have high IQ. But there's also another factor that's related to longevity that was uncovered just a few years ago in Australia. Compared with adults who watch less than 2 hours of TV a day, those who watch more than 4 hours had a 46% higher risk of death from all causes, 80% higher risk of cardiovascular death during a 6-year study period. Each hour spent sitting in front of the TV per day raised a person's risk of death from cardiovascular disease by 18% and the risk of cancer by 9%. Now, they looked at in this study to see whether it was just the sitting. But it wasn't the sitting because they didn't find adverse effects of sitting and doing homework. They didn't find adverse effects of sitting in an educational environment such as you're sitting in today. But they did find significant adverse health effects of sitting and being entertained. Particularly in a frontal lobe suppressant way. And it even has an adverse effect on the immune system. So that's another reason why low IQ is associated with increased risk of death is simply when the frontal lobe goes down, this is the control center of the entire being. And when that control center goes down, even immunology worsens. And your risk of pneumonia and those type of things and even cancer goes up. Here's what it says, reading or doing homework is not associated with the risk. It's not the sedentary behavior itself, but something inherent about or associated with television viewing. Alvin Toffler is a media expert that designs commercials in America. He's read a number of books, some of which, if you took communications class in college, you might have read yourself. But he clearly states this, constant stimulation of the senses shuts down the analytical processes. So now you not only have fast-moving images on the screen, but then you have rock and roll set to it. It's called MTV. It will produce a strong suppressant effect on the frontal lobe of the brain. It will shut down the analytical processes. And notice what else he says will happen. And ultimately, it will shut down the ability to face life rationally. This leads to escape techniques that involve withdrawal, apathy, and rejection of disciplined thinking when faced with difficult duties and decisions. When we have difficult duties and decisions, that's when we need to have the disciplined thinking. But instead, escape techniques will come up when we need to have disciplined thinking, and we will instead have withdrawal, apathy, and of course, make the wrong decision. And what sets all of this up? The constant stimulation of the senses. You can see why our societies around us are starting to decline in exponential form. Large degree due to the frontal lobe suppressants that are so widely available. The other problem that's happening is something that I have in my own pocket called an iPhone. There's iPads as well. And those, of course, can be used for good things, such as mentioned here. Digital classroom tools like computers, tablets, and smartphones offer exciting opportunities to deepen learning through creativity, collaboration, and connection. But these very devices can also be what to students? Distracting to students. Similarly, parents complain that when students are required to complete homework assignments online, it's a challenge for students to remain on task. They'll be doing their homework, and then all of a sudden some sort of Facebook message will come up, and pretty soon they're off of their homework page, and then pretty soon they're shopping for this or that, and pretty soon they're looking around this way, and their homework isn't being done because of the distractions that are there. Studies show if students don't learn how to concentrate and shut out distractions, research shows they'll have a much harder time succeeding in almost every area of life. The problem is attention is under siege more than ever. The real message is because attention is under siege more than it ever has been in human history, we have more distractions than ever before. We have to be more focused on cultivating the skills of attention. If young students don't build up the neural circuitry that focused attention requires, they could have problems controlling their emotions and being empathetic. The circuitry for paying attention is actually identical in the brain for the circuits for managing distressing emotions. The attentional circuitry needs to have the experience of sustained episodes of concentration, reading the text, understanding and listening to what the teacher is saying in order to build the mental models that create someone who is well educated. One of the researchers behind this is Daniel Goleman. He's written a book recently called Focus, the Hidden Driver of Excellence. But he says one of the keys to success is a digital Sabbath every day, when kids aren't being distracted by devices at all and are engaged in focused learning. He talked about the need to get rid of the internet, computers, tablets, phones for extended periods of time each day where you can spend focused time on learning, and that will actually improve your ability to learn throughout the rest of your life if you have the ability to cut out distractions and have that focused attention that is required. Studies also show the more entertainment screen time, the less sleep. And sleep also has a role in regards to intelligence, particularly not only adequate sleep, but early sleep. This is a graph of melatonin. You can see in yellow, melatonin starts to be produced by the brain significantly in response to darkness or near complete darkness. This is when the lights are out and you're ready to go to bed. If you change your bedtime from 9 p.m. to midnight, however, you will decrease that area under the curve by about 50%. And melatonin is what's needed for you to be able to put in long-term memory what you learned that day so that you can do well on the final and on board exams and those sorts of things. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Certainly healthy and wise. If you have those two things, you have the opportunity, much greater opportunity for wealth. But I can tell you this also positively affected myself. In fact, I shudder as to where I might be, because I was also raised in Detroit in a very adverse neighborhood and adverse environment. My father was an engineer for General Motors, and thus we had to be raised in Detroit, close to where he worked. But fortunately, my father was like Ben Carson's mother. We were the only people on the street that were not raised without television. Actually, my oldest brother was